Hey everybody. Well, we're back for chapter 10, and this is on production and operations management. I'm going to keep this one pretty brief. There's a ton of stuff in this chapter, and one of the main reasons I wanted you to read it is that you'd get an overall picture of where manufacturing fits into the business world. When we think about starting a small business, we don't necessarily think about manufacturing, or we don't necessarily think about all the different types of jobs that are available in the manufacturing areas. So it starts out with showing us what the process is, the production process. Look on page 274 in the binder version. So you can see that really it's just inputs, meaning the resources, raw materials. Then the conversion process is the production process, right? How we're going to take all of those and make it into something. And the output is the good or service that we produce. So if you're going to make tennis shoes, right, you got to have lots of resources and rubber and laces, all these things that go together, right? That's the inputs. And then the conversion process is the manufacturing plant that puts all that together to make a pair of tennis shoes. And of course, the output is the tennis shoe, like, ta-da! Like it just happens like magic. Well, there's a lot to it. And the typical production process, the systems, is they show on figure 10.8, they give you a little visual of that as well. So they give us like a computer factory and primary inputs, then the transportation and the outputs. And they just kind of run through then what a trucking firm might look like, the retail store, automobile body shop, county sheriff's department. So we don't often associate production with all of these different things that are going on. And there's a real strategic importance to this. Oh, excuse me. It's really dry. My allergies again are acting really strange because maybe it's so dry. Anyway, the strategic importance of production. We can't, if we didn't have mass production, just think of what life would be like, right? If we couldn't produce things in mass quantities in a very effective, efficient way, it would really change the way we all do business. So they talk about production as a vital part of our society, our business sector or business activities. This would be the manufacturing sector, right? And then how we break that down between production and operations. And we don't need to worry about all that. There's just some critical points in the chapter I want to talk about, not all of these details. You guys can read through what is a flexible production process, customer driven production, that kind of stuff, and the processes themselves. But I want us to look a little bit at page 277, technology and the production process and green manufacturing processes, because this is really new. I mean, may not think it's new because we've been talking about it for a long time, and there's industries that have been very adventurous prior to now. But now we're kind of hearing it as an everyday vernacular, and we talk about the green process, and here they're talking about industries that use the LEED model, leadership in energy and environmental design. Western Technical College, we are part of a LEED model, or we use that model. And I think we just won another award for it or something or other. And we're all very conscientious about how we try to operate our business when it comes to the environment. So the green manufacturing processes, like look at robots and computer-aided design or CAD and all of these different things, flexible manufacturing systems. There's all kinds of different ways that we can go green. They give us some examples like eBay and its green commerce push. So, when you think about going green with something and all of these different businesses, how does that impact the way that they operate their business if they want to function as a LEED model or is going green, that kind of thing? Well, you have to start thinking about these different well, there's advantages and disadvantages, but these different processes to be able to do that. So for example, robotics. Well, if you have robotics, you're also creating different kinds of jobs because now somebody has to build robots, right? That's a whole other industry unto itself, or another sector. And then the people that actually then within the manufacturing process have to learn to operate the robots, all that good stuff, right? So it's very intricate. And that's why it kind of leads into this computer integrated manufacturing. Manufacturing is not what you might have in your mind, like I'm going to work on an assembly line my whole life until I die. It's going to be so boring. Wow, there's some really cool things going on in manufacturing. I've been working with manufacturers for the last 15 years. I do tons of my corporate training with manufacturing facilities. And some of the coolest things I've ever seen are in It's a job, would be considered a job shop, it's a corporation in Black River Falls area, and they use the coolest laser stuff like you've never seen before. They're the ones that manufactured the I don't know, they kind of look like a cow catcher. Like in the old trains had big cow catchers for when they're going through, or big plow heads for trains that go through the mountains and stuff like that. They created and designed for the government, for our military, for the protective shields on the, oh my gosh, now I'm not going to remember the name of the vehicles that needed to be bulletproof. Anyway, this little company in Black River Falls, with all these different computers and these huge lasers, created that stuff. It just was fascinating to go through their plant and see how they did all of this. So that then leads us into figuring out, okay, if you're going to have a manufacturing plant, and depending on what you're producing, obviously, you have to decide where they're going to be located. And I'm on page 280, the location decision. So companies look all over the world to try to figure out where to build their next plant. A lot of it has to do with, okay, what are the resources available in that area that I need? Then what is the transportation? What do I need to do to get it back to my customers? So if you look at here, transportation factors, physical factors, and human factors. Is there enough labor there for me to be able to do it? So that's why we look all over the world to try to decide where are we going to put these plants, right? Where are we going to make our stuff, and how we're going to make our stuff. The hit or miss, the one on Mexico is interesting. The Mexico becomes a major hub for auto manufacturing. And I think I might even have you guys working on something with that with Mexico. I know I have us looking at the Harley-Davidson case. And then we get into what are the different jobs that we do in manufacturing. So the job of production managers, for example. You have to be an extremely good planner. So planning, facility layout, like how are we going to design the facility? They give you all these big facility layout designs on page 284. Well, somebody's got a plan on how that works. And then again, it depends on what you're making. And then how is the manager has to decide then now, well, how are we going to actually make this happen? Now that we've got it designed, we figure out what we're going to make, how are we going to make it happen? That's the implementation part of this. So now the manager has to start thinking in line of, okay, do we make, buy, or lease? So in car manufacturers, for example, one of the first things that they outsource, like we used to make everything in the US for our cars, right? For our US made cars. We don't do that anymore. Now part of what we do is outsource a lot of those things. Well, actually, pretty much everything in the United States now. Cars are assembled in the United States. They're not necessarily made in the United States. It's not just tomato. It's literal. So back in the day, we used to actually make everything. We had foundries. We had all this stuff that we made. One of the first things that we farmed out, and I don't remember the year, maybe back in the 80s, somebody would have to go look it up and check it for me, was brakes. We found out that it was cheaper to actually outsource and have our brakes made and brought in from outside our country. I don't remember where the first source was that we made brakes from. And then it went on from there, and you can see where we're at now. But it's really interesting, too, when people talk about, well, my car, I'm only going to buy, an American-made car, so I'm going to buy a Ford, Chevy, or whatever. Well, guess what? Most of those parts and all the things that are assembled together aren't made here in the USA, so you could argue it's not really American made. But some of the biggest, some of the biggest car manufacturing plants, or assembly plants they're called now, are in the southern part of the states, and they make cars for companies overseas. So we have Japanese, and I think the book gives us a layout, might have us. Either that or I give you some stats somewhere on it. Read all the stuff that's in the learning plan or watch the videos. But we have some of the biggest plants, Nissan plants, what's the Korean, Kia? Is it Kia? I can't remember. In the southern part of the United States. So they employ a huge number of Americans to assemble their cars. And then, of course, they sell a good portion of them here in the States. But then they ship them back to their own countries and sell them. So it's like everybody's going which way when it comes to manufacturing. But part of that is that we are obviously a global economy. So therefore, we just have to figure out where is it cheapest to do any of these things. So then, like, where are my suppliers at? How am I going to control my inventory? How am I going to manage all of this? That's what managers do in production facilities. It's no different than really any other process. We just have to do a lot of planning. Just-in-time systems, right? Just-in-time inventory control. Managers have to learn to understand and manage that. It was one of the things that I learned as a small business consultant, that people did not have good control over their inventories. I would go in and say, well, how much money do you have in your inventory? They wouldn't even know. I said, well, how can you not know that? Because everything you have in your inventory, I said, if you thought of that as dollar bills, paper dollar bills stacked up on the shelf, if you had a bunch of them sitting there collecting dust, would you do that? I said, well, no, I'd never leave money laying around. I said, well, why do you got inventory laying around? That was the quickest way to start having this conversation about inventory control. Materials planning, you can read through that. And then, of course, we have to learn to control the production process. And that goes through, and they give us the steps of that on page 298, the steps in the production control process. So we plan it, we route it, we have to do the scheduling for it, then we have to dispatch it, and then we have to follow up with it as part of the process. And of course, every manufacturer and every type of product dictates a different way in which people do this. Lots of different ways to do this. But that's where you get into, like, when you talk about scheduling, Gantt charts, PERT charts, all that really cool stuff, right? Yeah. But I do love Gantt charts. Oh my gosh, you guys could map out all your homework for every class in a Gantt chart, and you'd have a visual to know when everything is due by week throughout your whole semester. I had my students do it in one of my other classes, or one of our program classes. And then quality, of course, cannot be emphasized enough as how important quality is across the board, not just in production, but in retail, everything that you do, and in services. We always have to try to control quality, and that's where we get into ISO standards. So I have students, for example, that go through the program and they actually get jobs with manufacturers doing all kinds of things. They never see the production floor. They might be an ISO certified. ISO is, that conversation is on page 294. And one of my former students is now the ISO manager for a mine. Yeah. Who would have thought it, right? Because of course they have so many different regulations. ISO qualifications and quality controls are all about regulations. So in a nutshell, don't hurt yourself in chapter 10. I just want you to understand how manufacturing fits into this whole part of business overall, and that it's just another sector, just like a hotel restaurant is a sector of business that we look at, because many of my students are involved in manufacturing in some way. So that wraps up chapter 10. We'll see you with our next chapter, which I don't remember what it'll be. So we'll see you then, and have a good day. If I can shut this off.